Okay,
So,
sir.
Okay, sir. Good afternoon. Today we have MGPE007, Non-Violence Movements After Gandhi. Professor N. Sriramulu sir will take this session. So, Vinay Gandhi student is here and sir will continue. Okay, sir. Continue, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, along sir health.
పర్వాలేదు సార్, నేను ఈరోజు బాగుంది.
పర్వాలేదా? అదే చూడండి, కంటిన్యూ చేయడం లేదంటే 1 hour చెప్పి ఆపేయండి, పర్లేదు.
అట్లేదు సార్. ఓకే సార్.
మీదే చాయిస్.
ఓకే సార్, థ్యాంక్ యూ సార్.
ఓకే సార్.
Today I will continue, sir. Okay. Good afternoon, students. Today I have to study the post-Gandhian scenario. India after Gandhi represents in the profoundest sense of them a negation of the Gandhi concept of India. It signed village republics. It comprising of the self-reliant and democratic local communities committed to the ideal of the minimization of wants. However, when after independence, Jawaharlal Nehru became the Prime Minister, he declared India's tryst with destiny. This tryst was create a totally new India model upon the industrial civilization, which Gandhi had condemned in Hindu Swaraj. In translating his vision of India, Nehru progressively undermined what Gandhi had envisaged about the reconstruction of the Indian society after the base of Indian civilization, which was dismantled by the British rules. The realization of the Nehruism vision of India was, however, beset with a set of three major problems that were crying out for solution: ethnic and social divisions, extreme economic disparities, regional differences and imbalances. So, multitudinous languages and existence of princely states, all these problems kept Nehru thought India socially, culturally, and politically fragmented and nourished reinforced local and regional loyalties. As such, integration of diverse people, unification of political purpose for the fair enoughness. The second problem was that to evolve a political system that could ensure unity of the political purpose and its realization in a concerted manner. So, creation of such a political system was necessary in view of these problems, which were socialism problems, economic backwardness that India suffered from lower mortality rates, literacy, backward economy, low agricultural productivity kept Indian people extremely poor, and health services were conspicuous by their absence. So, the third problem pertained to social and economic reforms. India had to tackle successfully to realize the Nehruvian vision antam. It is one of the new India vision. The solution of these problems was urgent and required a strategy of development with a view to embarking upon a beneficial growth trajectory. Recently, India had shed its old socio-cultural gap and emerged as a modern political entity for action in his history. The national reconstruction for promoting a new pattern of social life and relations meant realignment of the past and its socio-economic institutional arrangements, and also the initiation of the process of radical change in the economy by introducing new thought ways and work ways to give fill fill up to modernity without disturbing the existing equilibrium. Given the systematic goals certain questions relating to the character and the functioning of the newly created institution, political, social, and economic last 3 decades arise. So, political structure, how is its work? 3 years of rigorous deliberation, discussion, and drafting bore fruit, and the Constitution was inaugurated on 26 January 1950. The preamble promised justices to all people, social, economic, and political justice provided to all the people of India, while the directive principles of state policy exhorted the government and other provisions imposed upon it. The responsibility of the pursuing the social revolution and protect the minorities, fundamental rights enjoined. The government both the protection rights and refrain from violating them. The power of the central and state governments to amend the constitution was subject to judicial review. So the Supreme Court became the apex court and the last resort of appeal. The central government, which was given vast powers to intervene in the affairs of the state governments, an entirely new institution. The constitutional head of the state, the president, has created two vitally important commissions, the Finance Commission and the Planning Commission. Both were came into existence. The government, including the National Civil Service, which was made responsible for economic development, over and above collecting taxes and maintaining order in the country, to enhance national unity and to promote economic development without alienating subordinate levels of government, which was tackled by republishing the federal structure, the parliament. So the constitution provides for a parliamentary system in which the lower house of the parliament, the Lok Sabha, which was represent the sovereign people of India. It is one of the highest legislative organ. The National Forum for the articulation of the public opinion and aspirations of the public and is elected every 5 years through popular elections unless dissolved earlier for some reason. The Lok Sabha is the highest lawmaking body of the country and it enjoys the equality of status with the Rajya Sabha except in the matter of money bills, which can originate only in the Lok Sabha. The people's will is supposed to reign supreme in the Lok Sabha. Through the members of the parliament, they elect as their representatives. When called for, they exercise their franchise moved by their reaction to the acts of omission and commission, which were the party in power. The Indian hello,
Yes, sir.
okay, madam. ఇది డిస్టర్బ్ అయింది ఎందుకు ఫోను The Indian Constitution seeks to institutionalize the rule of law, which were prescribed certain goals to be pursued by the political community and authorizes the ways and means for realizing these goals. It set out certain substantive goals to be pursued to carry on the social revolution it had launched and provides a framework that stipulates the goals to be achieved by the state. The constitutional provisions are the subject to change depending on diverse in socio-economic interests. Those who are adversely affected or if the promotion of their interest is blocked. So to change the concerned provisions as values change and the views regarding how the world works and the social forces associated with those force associated with those views change constitution to tends to change either their letter is amended or their spirit is reinterpreted. Thus, politics also determines the way of these constraints work. What forces should change them? India opted for representative democracy as a model of governance. This means that the sovereign people rule through their chosen representatives. India has opted for a single member constituency where representatives are chosen by majority vote. The key to the working of the political system is the existence of two or more parties that compete for the capturing and controlling the power apparatus of society. India was initially ruled by the Indian National Congress, which happened to be a dominant party, but soon its dominancy began to atrophy was ultimately replaced by a robust multi-party system. Congress majorities in the parliament and state legislatures confronted the JP movement and All India Railway Workers strike in 1974 that paralyzed the largest railway network in the world. All these developments led the proclamation of internal emergency by Mrs. Indira Gandhi in June 1975. After the Allahabad High Court unseated Mrs. Gandhi, the change of electoral malpractice in the 1971 that election. The entire leadership of the movement and the opposition parties, including a few Congress residents, were put behind the bars. So press censorship was also imposed. The emergency, the Congress remained extremely unpopular. As a result, the Congress party suffered the heaviest loss in the 1977 elections, just after the termination of the emergency. However, we know how loss of the party and replaced by the Janta party, Janta government, which was Mrs. Gandhi back in power. She makes some miracles in the elections which were held in 1980. So these are all the some of the political realms. Social creation in India involves a complete turnaround of society from what it formerly signified. The reconstruction rests primarily on material prosperity. It is economic prosperity, economic change. The process of social creation today needs the support of democracy and also economic development to sustain irreversible and durable modernization. At the time of independence, India had inherited a backward economy rendered more depressing by the Britishers draining India's wealth. The British rulers did initiate the process of economic development, but it was insufficient to unleash the creative entrepreneurial energy that could have introduced a self propelling dynamism in Indian economy. So the Gandhian model of development was articulated by Sriman Narayana Agarwal, who, inspired by Mahatma Gandhi's vision of man and his world, emphasized the need for conserving indigenous culture and civilization and promoting organic growth. This plan was emphasized the need to avoid excessive regimentation of the masses and to promote a democratic political life and relations as well as ensuring minimum state control. Post Nehru period was characterized by political instability, widespread social unrest, and also marked fluctuations in the planning process as well as in the development achievement. The economy had become considerably weakened following the Indo-China War of 1962 and the Indo-Pak War of 1965. It became further weakened because of natural calamities like drought, failure of the agriculture, and absence of a radical program of redistribution, food do, the food shortage, and weakened further due to administrative inefficiency and corruption also. The central role of the state in guiding the course of economic development saw a strict regulation and control of the private sector, which is view to attaining its activities to this aim and objectives of planned economic development. What was aimed? It was progressive elimination of social, political, and economic exploitation and inequality, along with the motive of private gain in economic activities. All this was summarized under the rubric of socialist pattern of society. It laid emphasis on the need of feasible increase in national income through an increase in an agricultural productivity and industrial development to improve the standard of life for the people. So the economic development through planning was the balance of payment difficulties, food shortages, rising population, shrinking marketable food surplus, and stagnant agricultural production. There was political upheaval, social unrest, deepening economic crisis, and radical, and also remove poverty unsupported by concrete action. So, the third phase of planning began in 1984, which saw the acceleration of the process of liberalization as well as the emergence of state units as power centers enjoying a decisive voice in government formation at the national level. P.V. Narasimha Rao in 1991 the widened the scope for the private sector to play a pivotal role in shaping the economic and taking it on a higher growth. The third phase is ongoing and marked by the process of liberation that becomes inevitable because of the malfunctioning of the economy, excessive state control, straight private sector, and highly inefficient public sector were responsible for this. India, therefore, embarked upon the process of liberalization in the 1980s, limited economy. So, a huge balance of payments crisis ensued in 1991. The liberalization process has unleashed a higher economic growth rate. Several problems remain unresolved. For example, the average gross domestic product (GDP) and per capita income growth rates are lower. There is a prolonged deceleration in agriculture and industrial growth rates, along with increased of the farmer decline, the steep rise of unemployment ratio. Agriculture is grossly neglected without the certain of infrastructure like irrigation, research and extension, power and transport, and distribution of land directly to the cultivator, and the creation of the cooperatives so that growth benefits could be shared with the population at large. The Green Revolution did help in achieving self sufficiency in food, but it increased the cost of production greatly, burdening the small and marginal farmers. So the rich farmers ఇప్పుడు the benefits of the Green Revolution, democracy and social revolution. India embarked on creating a new social order founded on the values of freedom, equality, and fraternity. The constitutional provisions setting the goals for social revolution, such as the directive principles of state policy, fundamental rights, the various articles protecting minority rights, these protecting the welfare of the weaker sections, especially SC, STs, and other backward classes, have now been in operation for the last 6 decades. The fundamental rights aim at protecting the individual's private space from encroachment of the public space, such as society and its conventions, and the government and other public associations. The provision of group rights was necessitated by cumulative inequality in a caste differentiated, hierarchically organized society sanctioned by age old traditions. Certain socioeconomic groups such as SC, ST, and OBC have been deprived of enjoying social goods such as wealth, power, and prestige, and need to be uplifted not individually but as a group. Consequently, group rights have been granted to these groups so that they can be adequately empowered to take their rightful place in society. In order to achieve these objectives, the provision of removing socio-economic disparities that cripple individuals and prevent them from participating effectively in the shaping of collective decisions has been provided for in the Constitution, particularly in the preamble to secure for all social, economic, and political justice. The working of the Constitution is, however, influenced by socio-cultural environment of a country. India is no exception to this. Social stratification and cultural moorings have limited the spread of democracy and social and economic reforms, especially among the lowest castes and poorest citizens. However, representative government and adult franchise are cherished by one and all of the empowerment they bring. Insofar as fundamental rights are concerned, they, especially the right to property, it created visible strains because of inequality, incompatibilities between the right of the individual and the goals of social revolution on the one hand, and between directive principles and fundamental rights on the other hand. On the other, these incompatibilities have led to a series of constitutional amendments and also to occasional instances the parliamentary and judicial positions as to who is more capable guardian of the constitution. The fundamental rights are no longer considered to be absolute. There are certain limitations, qualifications, and also exceptions to these. They are subject to constitutional limitations and judicial review to ascertain conformity to the basic structure of the Constitution. So, an attempt to remove incompatibilities between the directive principles of state policy and fundamental rights is also discernible. Even while the directive principles are not justificable, the decisions of the Supreme Court from 1970 onwards have emphasized their positive aspects. The directive principles have been held to supplement the fundamental rights for achieving the objectives of a welfare state. The Supreme Court has begun to underscore their significance in determining the validity of an act. It holds that the exercise of fundamental rights by individuals cannot be ensured unless and until the directive principles are implemented. So the provisions of group rights is meant to meet out preferential treatment to excluded or marginalized social groups within the Indian population. If the preamble assures social justice to all, the directive principles require the state to promote with special care the educational and economic interests of the weaker sections, and in particular of the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. The state is also directed to protect them from social injustice and all forms of exploitation. Article 46. In addition, Article 15.1 prohibits discrimination against a citizen on the grounds of religion, race, caste, place, or birth, or any of them. Going beyond legal equality, the Constitution permits the state through Article 16 Clause 3 to make any provision for the reservation of appointments or posts in favor of any backward class of citizens, which, in the opinion of the state, is not adequately represented in services under the state. Article 15 provides that nothing can prevent the state from making special provisions for the advancement of any socially and educationally backward class of citizens, SC/ST. The Constitution sanctions three types of preferential treatments: reservation of seats of legislative bodies for SC/STs, government jobs and educational institutions, provision of certain expenditure services and schemes such as scholarships, grants, loans, and land allotments, health care, legal aid, as well as some anti-poverty measures and measures of social protection intended to safeguard vulnerable groups from oppression and injustice. In all these, the framers of the Constitution refused to accept economic deprivation and the consequent backwardness as the sole criterion of identifying the groups for preferential treatment. So they treated social backwardness as the causa prima, the educational economic backwardness and deprivation. So these provisions have been eminently helpful in reducing the pains of depression and destitution. They have uplifted a large number of people from economic distress and social degradation. The programs of social justice, however, have not made a significant dent in the structure of the exclusion or even blunted its sharpness. So there is a gap between the deprived and the general population. Discrimination is employment, wages, credit, etc. So destiny have not only seen the forsaking of Mahatma Gandhi's vision of resurgent India. So the phenomenon of disproportionate development points to a serious gap between promise and performance. This is best illustrated by the progress India has made in achieving the Millennium Development Goals (MDG) that consist of a set of 8 targets to fight hunger, disease, and ignorance to be made. India is severely lagging in poverty eradication, in providing food to all, while food grains keep rotting in governments' godowns, in reducing access to health services, and infectious diseases. This backdrop serves as a catalyst for many movements that have been concentrating on issues of social justice and equality, leadership, and organizational patterns. There is some peace movements in India. Peace movements in India are still in their infancy. They must travel a long way before they become a part of the political life of the country. The, they lack organizational structure because of their intellectual fragmentation and isolated functioning. However, what strikes one most is that a new vision is nevertheless being articulated by a few groups in response to the present crisis in India, both political and socio-economic. The peace movements in India arise from an entirely different perspective from what obtains elsewhere, particularly in the West. The problems that confront the Indian people are quite far away from those. Gandhian agenda for peace movements. Gandhi is full faith and extraordinary practical commitment to non-violence and truth could not but be a portray of peace everywhere. That is why he said not to believe in the possibility of permanent peace amounts to disbeliefs in the guidelines of the human nature. But that was an essential philosophic hypothesis and not a political strategy. Peace is at once a political and ontological and an existentialist issue, but he was not to be easily taken by slogans and mere faith flashing sideshows. The attainment of real peace, he wrote, is impossible except for greater scientific precision, greater travel of the soul, greater patience, and greater resources than required for the invention and consolidation of means of slaughter. Again, he added, it cannot be attained by mere muster roll signed by millions of mankind during peace. The existing peace movements in the light of Gandhian approach cannot be considered a very big success. The Gandhian agenda requires non-violent and non-cooperative movement, both spontaneous and institutionalized by all those who are concerned with the issue of peace, poverty, ecology, human rights, etc. etc. Beyond the variety of followership, the analysis of leaders cannot rest content with enumerating their attributes and capabilities. Or can these attributes be understood by regarding the leader as an isolate? Relations to other constitute this meaning. To grasp those relations requires a follower oriented approach. While a follower oriented approach to this analysis and understanding of leadership may be beautiful in any study of leadership, it is a special interest in relation to Gandhi. Unlike a more rigorously ideological leader who might accept the human material with which he deals to adapt itself rather precisely to his movements, normative and behavioral requirements. Gandhi was strongly attuned to the varying inner states and potentialities of his followers. While remaining a movement leader, thus committed to shaping men, he suited the shaping to the character and logical his followers. His capacity to serve the variety of strengths and needs of those close to him, and this skill and versatility in shaping his response to each had less relevance for Gandhi's mass following. The mass following constitutes an category which can be given precision by a number of approaches. One can reach the mass following by situational analysis, asking who became involved. So, the important thinkers in post Gandhian leadership, Vinoba Bhave and Masruwala, Kumarappa JC, Kaka Kalkekar, Kaka Kalelkar, Dada Dharmaji, Shankara Diya, Dhirendra, Mazumdar, Jayaprakash Narayana, and J.B. Kripalani, all of them except Jayaprakash Narayana had been closely associated with Gandhi in his constructive work. Most of them had acquired during the lifetime of Gandhi some prominence both as original thinkers and as interpreters of his thought, and as such, their ideas cannot all be strictly considered post Gandhi. What rather happened after the death of Gandhi is that their thoughts came into greater prominence due to the peace movements, and the growth of the movements lead to their further elucidation and development. Jayaprakash Narayan, of course, came late into the field, and while Gandhi lived, he was a Marxian. Marxian. Besides these prominent persons, there are several others who deserve study as they lead some peace movements. Prominent thinkers, Vinoba Bhave is regarded as the moral and spiritual heir of Gandhi, who had a very high opinion of him. He told C.F. Andrews in 1917, Vinoba is one of the few fearless in the ashram. They do not come like others to be blessed by the ashram, but to bless it, not to receive but to give. Your son has acquired at so tender an age, such as high spiritedness. He expected Vinoba to be an instrument of greater service and deemed him capable of writing on the science of Satyagraha. He chose him as the first Satyagrahi, the individual Satyagrahi of 1940. Thus brought him into limelight as the ideal Satyagrahi. Vinoba Bhave's authority to represent Gandhi has been recognized by other close associates of Gandhi. Musrawal observed in 1948, we hold that Vinoba has understood best the principles of peace movements. Therefore, our faith in him is the highest. Tata Kalelkar, his opinion, Vinoba Bhave represents the high watermark of the Gandhian way of life and the Gandhian technique of rebuilding society. So, Vinoba was no mere interpreter of Gandhi. He was an original thinker with a simple. According to his own admission, Gandhi was not the only person to influence him, and he does not claim to represent him. He rarely speaks of Gandhi in public and has his own dignity, emphasis, and method. In the words of Alan Tennyson, like a candle lit at a neighboring flame, he now burns with a steady and separate light. So, number of associates, Kumarappa, Pehatat at Gujarat Vidyapit, had been the secretary of All India Village Industries Association from 1934 to 1948. Kaka Kalelkar is also had been a close associate of Gandhi. Before joining him, he was at Shantiniketan. Later on, he joined Gandhi and subsequently became the principal of Gujarat Vidyapit. He moved to Wardha later on, edit Sarvodaya, a Hindi monthly. He engaged himself in constructive work and led several peace movements. Dada Dharmadhikari, he was a prominent Sarvodaya thinker. He was first the publisher and then the co-editor of the Sarvodaya Monthly. Later, when a monthly of the same name was stated in August 1949, so he became its co-editor with Vinoba as editor and devoted his life for Sarvodaya movement. Mazumdar. He was an important leader of the Sarvodaya movement. He devoted himself to constructive work since 1921. He left his studies at all call of the non-cooperation movement. He became the president of All India Spinners Association after Gandhi's death. He was both an astute thinker and a great constructive worker. As such, he supplemented Vinoba both in the field of practical movement and that of thought. Jayaprakash Narayan also was the most prominent Sarvodaya leader after Vinoba. He was one of the founders of the Congress Socialist Party in 1934 and since independence has been as the most important political leader after Jawaharlal Nehru. He joined the Sarvodaya movement in 1954 after traveling a long way from Marxism to Gandhian thought. But it did not mean that he ceased to be a socialist. He himself observed the same old become light of freedom, equality, and brotherhood that had guided the course of my life and brought me to democratic socialism. You mean onwards around this turning of this road. My regret is that I did not reach this point in my life's journey while Gandhi was still in our midst. This evaluation of his thought made him an effective interpreter of Sarvodaya from a different angle. Another very prominent political figure who had, in several respects, a Sarvodaya outlook was Acharya J.B. Kripalani, a former president of the Indian National Congress. He had been associated with Gandhi since 1917. He also distinguished himself as a constructive worker who founded at Gandhi Ashrama in Uttar Pradesh and who inspired many young men to dedicate themselves to the cause of constructive work. Kripalani began his career as a teacher in the higher seats of learning and later on became the principal of Gujarat Vidyapit. Gandhiji's high regard for him is shown by the fact that at times he consulted him on matters which might be considered as purely personal, post-Gandhian organizational patterns. From the point of view of organizational patterns, there are two broader categories in which the peace movements in India may be classified. The future of the peace movements in India rests upon the capacity of its leadership and organizational pattern for vision and mobilization of the social forces within a broad process of framework on the conflicting dialogue that is already set in between the social power, more often enact to the static political power. So we cannot deny the rightful place to the developments mentioned below in the country. More than 4,000 people have shown their concern with and involvement. These developments undoubtedly help or build a perspective of the Indian peace movement itself. But this perspective still lacks clarity because of its incohesiveness and scattered functioning. In recognition of the size and diversity of this country, the happenings concerned the issues of peace and survival are to be taking place in isolation. There are new signs of drawing together of the anti-nuclear development from various parts of the country. Dynamic strategies and outcomes is another unit. Mahatma Gandhi has been the most inspiring icon in the history of non-violent movements. His arrival marked a watershed in the development of ideas and strategies of non-violence in leading the struggle for India's independence and liberation of its society from different evils. Gandhi employed various strategies to create effective power for achieving long-term collective goals. Deeply religious and experimental in temperament, Gandhi proved to be an able organizer, astute political strategies, and profound social visionary. His theory of principled non-violent action, which he called Satyagraha, expanded non-violence beyond its vast understandings limited to personal life by relating it with larger political goals and commitment to truth and self-improvement, constructive programs and active resistance of exploitation and injustice were essential for the pursuit of Gandhi's Satyagraha. Non-violent movements after Gandhi, the theory and practice of Gandhi, non-violent satyagraha had far-reaching global influence as reflected in the several non-violent movements for social and political transformation carried out in the last century. Both in India and outside, these movements sought to apply the ideas of Gandhi to the specific social, political, and economic circumstances of these societies. There is much greater awareness of non-violence. There is much greater awareness of non-violence today through networking, media coverage, and scholarly writings. This has led to the development and systematization of knowledge concerning non-violent campaign strategies and their dynamics. Non-violence movements probably one of the most significant non-violent efforts for large-scale socio-economic change in India after independence has been the Bodhan, that means gift of land, and Gramdan, gift of village. The movement launched by Acharya Vinoba Bhave 1895 and 1982 between. Vinoba Bhave was the most significant and charismatic Sarvodaya leader after Gandhi, who held considerable influence over Sarvodaya activists all over India. The Bhudan movement evolved from the constructive programs undertaken by Gandhi during his lifetime. The communist violence over land inequality in the Telangana region sparked up an alternative Sarvodaya approach to bring about justice in rural India. The constructive workers after independence focused on rectification of rural inequality through voluntary land redistribution. Bhudan was supplemented in 1952 by the concept of Gramadan and strengthened the spirit of non-violence after independence and reminded us of the imperative of placing the poorest of the poor. Several other movements in India have also been launched on non-violent lines to achieve the goals of social and political transformation. The total revolution movement against the authoritarian regime and imposition of energy in the 1970s led by Jai Prakash Narayan. Similarly, is noteworthy in this aspect, which could be studied in detail, movements against big dams and large-scale human displacements caused by the caused by them for prohibition, for conservation of forests, other natural resources, and so on, brought a refreshing new dimensions in India's socio-political landscape. Global national movements. Gandhi's non-violent methods were also applied globally in several important movements and in widely varying political circumstances. Perhaps the most remarkable cases of the non-violent resistance campaigns. After Gandhi have been the American civil rights movements of the 1950 and the 1960 led by Martin Luther King and the movement against apartheid regime in South Africa by Nelson Mandela. So for democracy movements against dictatorial and semi-authoritarian regimes in Argentina, Philippines, Chile, Poland, and Myanmar, and more, China, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, Serbia, Georgia. So these are all adopted non-violent strategies to secure political freedom. Similarly, movements for national self-determination carried out by the people of Tibet, East Timor, as well as anti-nuclear and peace movements were based on the principles of non-violent resistance. The campaigns for environmentally sound economic policies, for the protection of human rights, and for fairer globalization in today's world also meaningful link up with the Gandhian ideas on non-violence. The futures of non-violent movements. Non-violent action is not simply any act or method that is not violent. Going beyond the conventional and institutionalized methods of political communication and waging conflicts such as voting, discussion, negotiation, or lobbying, non-violent movements employ a number of active dynamic strategies of resisting oppression and injustice without causing violence in the form of a physical injury or destruction of properties. In this sense, non-violent movement is not passive or a fascist in nature. Gandhi, therefore, objected to the description of non-violent struggles as passive resistance or a phrase borrowed from the writings of thinkers like Leo Tolstoy. Non-violent movements reject cowardice and do not shy away from struggle against injustice. They are essentially mass movements. Even as in some contexts, symbolic individual actions might become the key method of action. They are a means of weighing conflict actively by discovering and mobilizing the moral power of the people. They keep the state out and attempt to bring about changes from below. Change of mentality and values is regarded more important than any imposed or legal reform in non-violent movements. Non-violent struggles are most exhausting. They require willingness on the part of the adherents to take risks and bear great personal suffering without violent retaliation. So the non-violent methods are preferred in movements because they involve challenge to the legitimacy of the actions of the state, which is more effective than constitutional or legal techniques. Besides, non-violence action usually wins more support than the violence. When violence is used against non-violent protesters, it is widely seen as unjust and it leads to an expansion of support base of the movement. Non-violence can generate support of the people, even from the adversary side, who might shift their loyalty moved by the suffering undergone by non-violent protesters. Non-violent movements are also more participatory in character as they make it possible for even children, elderly people, women, and persons with disabilities to contribute to the many forms of non-violent action. Greater participation results into greater empowerment of the movement. Violent movements, that is the Soviet Union, Cuba, or China, are generally followed by an increase in the powers of the state or even the establishment of dictatorial state. Dictatorial state. Non-violent movements, in comparison, promote decentralized, democratic, and participatory process even after they have come to an end. Types of non-violent movements. Non-violence is both a philosophy and a strategy that strives to attain change without the use of violence and can be distinguished into two kinds: movements that use non-violence on principled grounds, the movements that remain non-violent due to strategic reasons. So non-violence that is grounded in religious, spiritual, and moral injections against the violence is called principled, philosophical, or ethical non-violence. Non-violence that is based on political or tactical calculations is referred to as strategic or tactical or pragmatic non-violence. Therefore, we treated a complementary, for example, the civil disobedience campaigns during India's independence movement or during the American civil rights movement, both advanced the level of truth and brought about the change in the balance of power of the government. Principled non-violent movement. In principled non-violent struggles, the practitioners explicitly affirm their intent to resolve a conflict without the use of violence and adopt precautions to carry out that intention. In the Gandhian sense, non-violent movements cannot be waged for purely selfish or arbitrary ends. As such, ends would fail to unleash the spiritual energies of the people. There is some strategy for non-violent movements, although many prominent leaders like Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King, they were committed to principled non-violence. The vast majority of the participants in non-violent movement struggles have used non-violence without deep commitment to its moral and spiritual core. According to the strategic non-violence perspective, in the most recent cases of non-violent resistance, the protagonists were not motivated by moral values of love and self-sacrifice. Instead, they selected a non-violent strategy in order to achieve results with means that are more effective and less costly as compared to the violent means. So, silent components of non-violent strategies. The idea of strategies has been originally conceived in relation to wars and military campaigns. In the military, parallel strategy refers to the deployment of troops before the enemy is actually engaged. Though originating in the military space, non-violent movements have adapted the ideas of strategy to their goals and operations. Strategy is a plan for the conduct of a movement. It involves the basic ideas of how the movement shall develop and how its separate components shall be welded together to achieve its objectives in the most advantageous manner. Genesha has theorized the non-violent movements and systematized an important field of inquiry about their strategies and dynamics. It has score of different techniques of non-violent struggles along with their historical examples. As strategies have to do with power directly and are concerned about fighting against unjust or exploitative forces to non-violent power. So there are some four-level strategies: management of non-violent movements. There are some methods also for the non-violent methods of intervention, generation of power through non-violent strategies, dynamics of non-violent movements, mechanisms of non-violent change. According to the Ganesha, there are four mechanisms that impact power relationships between the non-violent movement and its adversary and determine the outcomes of the non-violent movements, conversion, coercion, accommodation, or disintegration. These are the four mechanisms of the non-violent change. Role of leadership in non-violent movements. There are three levels of human resources involved in a non-violent movement: leadership, movement activists, the general public. As exemplified by Mahatma Gandhi, a non-violent movement, Luther King, the Martin Luther King, ఇంకా one more, Nelson Mandela, visionary and charismatic leadership plays the most critical role in the success of non-violent movements. Leadership is the process of the influencing, motivating, and enabling members to achieve the objectives of a movement. An effective leader brings inspiration, courage, and clarity of purpose to the movement. He also creates the future vision of the movement and acts in a democratic and participatory manner and retain and broaden the movement's social base. It is therefore vital for a non-violent movement to apply principles of sound leadership and to recognize a leadership style that serves the movement well. Outcomes of non-violent movement. Non-violent actions in India and abroad have had a mixed record during the last 6 decades. However, there is ample historical evidence that establishes that non-violent movements can be an effective method of social transformation under certain conditions. They have helped in toppling dictators and establishing democratic regimes. At another level, they have advanced the people's freedom and rights of the marginalized groups and also the minorities in the existing democracies. The overall record of accomplishment of non-violent movements has been significantly better than that of the changes brought about by violent means. Of course, instances of the failure of the non-violent movements also exist, such as the repression of the pro-democratic movement in China in 1889, the failure of the movement led by Aung San Suu Kyi to overthrow military regime in Myanmar. Similarly, the Tibetans' non-violent struggles for self-determination has not borne fruits despite decades of activism. So, while there are spontaneous dimensions in the origin of the non-violent movement, there is some more movements, environmental movements, Chipko Andolan movement, and also Chipko as an eco-feminist movement. The concept of development in a market economy concentrates on marginal progress and the growth of commodity production as the main tenets for a contented human life. What it ignores consists of the two crucial elements: the air, water, land, and other living beings. Any resource depletion aspects the women and children. First, the farmer who plays a significant role in ecological conservation. Narmada Bachao, Andalan, and Tehri Dam. So there is a number of movements were started in India. dam constructions in India. By the end of the British rule in India, the country witnessed the construction and operation of large dams numbering over 100, primarily to confront famine that affected, affected the nation. They were still viable considering the low cost of construction and the number being few, but the increasing in their number in the post independent era continued were seen as a monuments of progress. Some of the dams constructed during that time include Hirakud Dam, Damodar, Bakranangal. The expenditure for the dam construction assumed huge proportions, and the subsequent planning commission assigned great importance to these monuments of progress. At the same time, post construction, many of the dams added to the fury of the flood in various states, and thus the vulnerability of the people to the hazards of such large projects became glaringly evident. So, some of the negative impacts also, the destruction of agricultural land, rendering the fertile land into salt infested areas, uprooting of people from their homes for dam and reservoir constructions, destroying their social and cultural lives, and their health also, severe damage to the land through earthquakes, and deteriorating quality of the drinking water, exposing the real beneficiaries of the projects, industries, elite, and those in the political class who commissioned the projects, Goldsmith, and etc. Socio-economic ecological impact. Large dams will simply destroy the livelihood patterns of the people living in the vicinity of the construction areas. They also destroy the people's love, attachment, and sentiments associated with their personal possessions, property, and land acquired mostly as an inheritance. As they are subjected to displacement, their social fabric of life and traditional echo of their culture too are displaced, making them strangers in their own country. So, their assimilation into other culture, therefore, is not easy, making them much vulnerable and hostile a lot. Surprisingly, most of them reject the huge sums of money, huge sums of money they are offered and settle for nothing less than being allowed to stay where they are. Women in particularly, they are affected a lot who have to make major adjustments in their life partners, having been displaced, children to get uprooted from their traditional social and cultural life. So these are all some of the drawbacks. Most importantly, the ecological consequences prove to be all the more damaging, not only to the displaced lost their land and property, but that the cost of resettlement, rehabilitation, and compensation assumes huge proportions that put heavy pressure on the state. The expenses, insufficient compensation, and position of an inferior land, and none are all high costs associated with the displacement due to the dam construction. A shift to urban areas often compels the people to live in slums, severely affecting their healthy living. So, Narmada Bachovo Andolan. The above description is of the river Narmada, the largest west flowing river in the Indian peninsula, that arises on the plateau of Amarkanatak in the Shadol district of Madhya Pradesh. It covers the states of Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Gujarat, and some of the parts of Rajasthan. Its course is 1,312 kilometers to the Arabian Sea through lush forests, hills, agricultural regions, rocky gorges. It has around 41 tributaries surrounded by three mountain ranges of Satpura, Vindhya, and Maikal. And on the fourth side merges into the Arabian Sea. On its basin, the villages constitute 81% comprises mainly tribal population consisting of Behilis, Gondas, Bayagas, and other whose primary occupation is agriculture. The Narmada Basin is rich in its natural resources. So, Narmada Valley is one of the development project. So, there were constructed a number of projects. Tehri Dam is also one of the project which was conceived as early as 1949 and was envisaged as one of the highest dams in the world. The project report to the Geological Survey of India in 1969 observed that a fault 20 meters wide approximately exists along the bed in the dam site. Treatment of this fault zone shall be a costly affair. So the dam site situated at the Bhagirathi river side between the rivers Bhagirathi and Bilanganga near the Tehri town is an area of highly seismicity often prone to earthquakes of severe magnitude. So opposing the dam construction, so number of objections came to the construction of the Tehri Dam, rehabilitation of the displaces and the issues of Narmada and Tehri reflect the systematic flaws that judicious planning of large dam constructions in India and abroad. They also clearly reflect the official apathy towards the sensitiveness of the local communities concerned. The dam constructions without consideration pose immense dangers to the overall structure of the systematic planning and implementation. For any plan to be implemented, it requires the weighing of pros and cons of the project concerned. These massive constructions severely affect the socio-economic fabric of the community, so that get displaced in the process. So efforts of the civil society and non-governmental groups who can effectively take up the case of these communities and communicate or pressure governments to reconsider to that global warming process. The nature and damage, the fragile ecology of the regions concerned, the concerns of the local communities need to be taken into consideration and should be adequately compensated where there is massive displacement. Non-violent struggles effectively convey a strong message to the state organizations but are often repressed by it. The state needs to play a sensitive role in order to curtail further damage to its subjects. It should adopt a community oriented approach. So, no project can be successful unless the local communities are taken into confidence and are empowered to assert their basic livelihood rights. These dam issues are not just ecological issues, they have intricate connections to our daily life and largely determine the course of our livelihoods. The thus involve the socio-economic dimensions which, when ignored, are likely to impose unprecedented damage. The need of the hour is to evolve effective plans and protect the fragile environment that is responsible for our substances. So the Narmada, Bachao Andalan and the Tehri Dam, the issues raise the issues of not just the environmental issues but the issues related to the livelihoods of the people who find themselves displaced due to the unplanned and inconsiderate planning of the large dam constructions. At the outset, these movements have lost out to the powerful governmental planning agencies whose short sightedness has threatened the very existence of the people living in the vicinity of dam construction areas. So the battles against the government and the commitment to asserting their rights through non-violent means have earned for them respect, dignity, and unflinching support from the society at large. These movements also reiterate the relevance of non-violence that gives us a ray of hope in the world that is afflicted by violence and injustice, which is at times promoted by the very institution of state. The need of the hour is to understand the local ecology, social and economic aspects of the local population before embarking on the projects at the gigantic scale. The understanding of the nature and its benefits to the mankind would augur well for our future. Another Silent Valley, it is also mainstream development. The project, the importance of protecting the forests through people's initiative, the basic characteristics of the new social movements, the power of non-violent interest articulation in the civil society, and the importance of the vibrant civil society in a democratic system. The importance of the Silent Valley. The Silent Valley National Park is one of the last undistributed rainforest and tropical mines evergreen forest in India. The park is located in the Nilgiris Hills, Palakkad district in Kerala, South India. The first English intrusion into the watersheds of the Silent Valley area was in 1847. The Silent Valley is a rectangular Hindukuja River stretches the entire 15 kilometers length of the park from north to south and fall into the Bharatpuja. It was divided. Silent Valley gets copious amounts of rainfall during the monsoons, but the actual amount varies within the region due to the varied topography. The mean annual rainfall ranges from over 5,000 millimeters in the Nilgipal area in the west to around 3,300 mm on the esteem side of the park. The valley is famous for many rare species of birds and animals. BirdLife International listed 16 bird species in Silent Valley as threatened or restricted. Nilgiri, wood pigeon, and Malabar orchid, and the different types of birds are there. The leopards, and etc. etc. The hydroelectric project. First, the Silent Valley got world attention not because of the rich natural diversity, but the successive struggle of the native people against the proposed hydroelectric project in the valley by the Kerala State Electricity Board in 1928. The location on the river at Sairandri was identified as an ideal site for electricity generation. So, the
Vinay Gandhi. Vinay?